Hello and welcome along to the Property Academy podcast by Omis Partners. I'm your host, Steve McKnight.
And I'm Andrew Nichols.
And today's show, we're talking about the Dunedin property market. Is it a good place to invest? Now, Andrew and I were just down in Dunedin talking to some of the Highlanders about investing in property. Now, one of the managers said, well, what about Dunedin? Is it a good place to invest now? And we said, you know what? We'll do a podcast. We'll update the numbers. Now, something else very interesting happened at that event.
For any of you that follow my Instagram, you will have seen Ed thrown across the room by a big burly All Black.
But not in a good way.
Yeah, I thought it would be a great idea to have Ed tackled. Anyway, Ed injured his arm and did carry on the speech. But I've had lots of positive feedback from some of the players saying what a good sport you were.
Well, there's a reason that I was not selected for the Turu rugby, touch rugby team back in year 6. So let's get into Dunedin, Andrew. What is the current state of the Dunedin property market? Why are people interested in it?
Well, see, I've never been that big a fan of Dunedin, and that's not fair because sometimes the numbers do make sense. But I guess probably my perception of that is because there's lots of old properties with high maintenance, really damp there and cold there. I don't think there's many properties that meet healthy home compliance. And there's a lot of student accommodation. But that can be quite good from a yield perspective. So one of the investors that I'm working with right now, they've got a property there where the yield is huge. Now, unfortunately, that yield gets eroded by the fact the maintenance bills are so high. Plus, students tend to have 10-month leases rather than a 12-month lease. So Wellington and Dunedin, you get a lot of 10-month leases. But there's also some good stuff happening in Dunedin right now. So as far as infrastructure goes, there's a lot of money being spent there. So the hospital, for example, about $1 billion being spent on the hospital there. Now, that's going to create jobs both in the construction side of things, but also for doctors and nurses afterwards.
The other thing I want to talk about is property prices. So on average, Dunedin's house price about 622 grand. Now, if I compare that to Auckland, the average house price in Auckland is over $1.3 million even today.
More than double.
More than double. So the average Auckland property, according to Property Value and CoreLogic, is about $690,000 more expensive than Dunedin. This is why people are interested in it right now. Even if we think about Lower Hutt, just above the Wellington region, house prices there about $155K higher than Dunedin. And Christchurch, things have changed a bit over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Christchurch now about $111,000 more expensive compared to Dunedin. Now, the thing that's really interesting about that is a couple of years ago, we weren't keen on Dunedin. And the reason was that property prices had shot up by such an amount. So if I look at, say, January 2020, when we were just a couple of months into this podcast, on average, the Dunedin house price was 527 grand. In Christchurch, it was 511 grand. So today, Christchurch house prices are about 100 grand more than Dunedin. But back then, when we started this podcast, Dunedin was more expensive than Christchurch. And I remember us talking about the fact that, you know what, Dunedin's just looking really expensive at that point in time.
That was before we had any fancy modelling as well.
Well, even if we look at what's happened to Dunedin and Christchurch property prices since 2015, what have we seen, Andrew?
So the interesting thing, over the 5-year period between January 2015 and January 2020, Dunedin house prices doubled. That's huge. That's a huge increase in a 5-year period. Now, Christchurch was up 6% over that same period of time. New Zealand up 45% over that same time. So New Zealand had gone up by roughly half. Christchurch had only gone up a little bit, but Dunedin had doubled in value.
And that's why we're saying, you know what, it looks a wee bit more expensive. Now, look, if I take you back to January 2015, if you had bought a house in Dunedin and compare it to today, your house value has gone up about 2.14 times. So it's just over doubled. Now, if I compare that to Christchurch, for instance, your house price has only gone up 50%. So it's 1.5 times what it was back in January 2015. So if you were making a decision about where to invest back in January 2015, Dunedin or Lower Hutt, those were the two main places to go where you would have made a lot of money. So if you're investing back in 2015, absolutely go for Dunedin. But let's say that you've been listening to us since 2020 when we started that podcast. What's the difference, Andrew?
If you'd followed our advice over that period of time, Christchurch has shot up 1.43 times, so you've made some reasonable money. Dunedin, on the other hand, has been the lowest performing at
About 1.12 times. So your house value is up 12% compared to what it was at the start of 2020, but in Christchurch, it's 43% higher. So what we're trying to get across here is which property market you decide to invest in really depends on what's going on at the time. So 2015, Dunedin was an excellent place to invest. Christchurch was not a good place to invest. 5 years later, 2020, Christchurch has been the top performer. Dunedin has been, and Lower Hutt have actually been the lowest performers.
And this is probably why it's really important you don't follow your friend's advice when it comes to investing in property, because if your friend had bought a property in 2015 in Dunedin and 5 years later you'd heard that it doubled in value, you'd be pretty excited about buying in Dunedin. Now, the problem is you're using isolated advice based on their success. That doesn't mean you're going to be successful.
And that's why we often use a model like our over-undervalued.
Oh, I love this so much.
For all of you guys listening to the podcast, by the way, all of these graphs, we're showing them live on YouTube. For everybody on YouTube, you can see this. So if you're listening to the podcast, just Google Opus Partners YouTube. It'll be the first thing that comes up. So if I zoom in and look at January 2020, so back then we were saying that the Dunedin property market was overvalued by 6 to 10%. So if we think about 2015, how undervalued was it? It was undervalued by about 15%. So that's where there really was some opportunity. What happened? House prices shot up. That meant that Dunedin got less and less undervalued, got more and more overvalued, and so that opportunity went away. So back when we were saying don't invest in Dunedin, that's because it was 10% overvalued. Things have changed a little bit more recently. We're now saying it's about 2% overvalued. You know, it's more or less where we would start to expect it to be. So I'm not saying, oh my gosh, there is a raging opportunity here in Dunedin, because it's not 12% undervalued, 10% undervalued like somewhere like Christchurch is right now. But there is more opportunity there today than there was back in 2020. And by the way, if you want to find out how this is all calculated, I've got a whole analysis of that on our website when you go there and find it. Now, Andrew, one question I want to know though is, okay, there could be an opportunity in Dunedin for the right property.
Yeah.
So which parts of Dunedin could be good for investment?
So I think probably one of the key areas that I see a lot of investors have successful yield portfolios is North Dunedin. So you've got a high student population because you're close to the University of Otago. So if you're a yield-based investor, there's probably good opportunity here. Second, I'd probably say the city centre. So with an upcoming infrastructure spend, increases jobs, increased population, that's probably a good hotspot as well. And if you're someone that likes, you know, a larger site, a larger piece of land, maybe somewhere like a Mosgiel.
Oh, so that's a small town just slightly out of Dunedin.
It's Dunedin's Rolleston.
Yeah, I'll just pull that up on the map. So anybody unfamiliar as well with where Mosgiel is, we can see where it is. How long do you think it takes to drive there?
I'm going to guess 20 minutes.
I'm going to guess 15 minutes.
You probably already looked.
Oh, it was exactly 20 minutes. Oh, I'm lost. But one other thing that people probably need to be aware of are what are some of the risks of investing in Dunedin? So you've got a whole heap of students there. Surely they're going to trash my place.
Yeah, I think that is a real risk around that student culture in Dunedin. And I've seen some of the student accommodation that some of my investors have invested in, and I don't have the stomach for it. And I think half the time they just kind of blindly invest in it and hope for the best, hope the property managers take care of it. Because the maintenance with these students, you know, just being there a lot of the time and maybe just being a bit rough with stuff, being just out of high school and used to mum and dad picking up after them, I think that there is a much higher risk of damage, but also often the properties that you're going to rent out to these students, like, you know, there might be 9 or 10 bedrooms, there is going to be really high maintenance on them.
Yeah, I'll tell you something. One thing that I saw on Instagram from one of our colleagues, also, well, she was down in Dunedin looking at some student rentals, and she said, oh, Ed, you could charge more money if your student rental is on the quote unquote right street. So if you're on a party street, maybe you can charge more for your house simply because students want to live on the party street. Now, let me tell you though, I was thinking, well, you might get an extra 50, maybe $100 in rent, but how much higher is your maintenance going to be if your property is on the party street?
Well, I've actually got an investor that I'm working with at the moment. He's got 2 of these student accommodation houses. One of them, so they've actually got names. Have I told you this before? So they've got names, and it's
You've told me all your stories.
Okay, all right. It's called like the Despicable or something like that, or it's something funny like that. And apparently they just have no vacancy because it's infamous. It's infamous for being a student accommodation, and people just want to live there.
Isn't it like 9 bedrooms and one bathroom?
Yeah, something horrendous like that. Oh God, that makes me shudder. But he actually is pretty successful with that particular property. But on the flip side, I have had tenants that have invested there and had, fires outside because they set their couches on fires and all this ridiculous stuff.
Sounds like I need to go back to university. Now, look, we don't just want to tell you about the risks. There are ways to mitigate these. So things like I'd definitely be having landlord's insurance if I was investing in Dunedin. All of those Dunedin investors are probably causing our insurance premiums for landlord's insurance to be higher. I'd definitely be having a property manager. I would not be wanting to get the calls from students in particular if there are things going wrong. Those poor property managers. I'd potentially also consider investing in an area that isn't just targeting students. So if you're thinking, okay, I think there's an opportunity in Dunedin, but I'm not sure if I've got the stomach to rent older properties out to students. Well, Dunedin has people that aren't students as well. Maybe you want to invest more around Calton Hill or Mosgiel, some of these other areas, maybe city centre, and not just target tenants. And the other thing is, if you're buying some of these older properties, and there are a lot of them in Dunedin, I'd definitely be getting a good property inspection so you're aware of any potential maintenance issues. But Andrew, would you recommend investing in Dunedin right now as of May 2023?
Right now, I think there are some opportunities, but I wouldn't just go out and buy anything. I would really run the numbers. So I did the numbers on a project for an investor just the other day, and actually it was good. I said, absolutely, that would be a great investment. But I do think that you've just got to be careful what you're buying.
Yeah, it's not what I'd say a slam dunk region where massively undervalued, massive yields. There are some really good things about it, but you just want to be very careful about the deal you buy. Right, let's wrap it up there, but please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And hey, if you're listening to the audio version of this, check it out on YouTube. Just Google Opus Partners YouTube, you'll find it there. And for anybody watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Steve McKnight. We're going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of the New Zealand property market. Until next time.